Now, comes up the question of what we Southern soldiers fought for. My friends, as a boy of 16 and a half years old, I didn't think about any abolition of slavery. My mind wasn't developed enough to take in what the politicians had in mind, and hence there was no trouble as to the freedom of the slaves. The South did not fight for the preservation or extension of slavery. My friend, it was a great curse on this country that we had slavery, and I thank God that I did not bring up my boys and girls under a system of slavery under which I was brought under. What did you boys fight for then? Here's what a great many people do not know. That as a young man that way I couldn't understand it fully. But I look back now and see my part in it and saw what we struggled for, and that was for states' rights. For states' rights. And as great many of you know, immediately after the war, the rights of the various states were very much curtailed, if I may use that word.
Since Patrick Claiborne died when he was still engaged to Susan Charlton, he never had any children, so he never had any offspring. I thought it would be fitting to share a brick with Patrick Claiborne, since I wrote a graphic novel about him. So there it is. What's going on, everybody? Professor Murph here for my deep dive into my 2008 graphic novel, Claiborne. Now, what you just saw in the video there was a monument that was erected in Jacksonville, Florida, before the monuments were being taken down. It's been was threatened to be removed by the mayor back in 2020 or 2021. So a group of historians got together and dismantled it and relocated it to a private location so that it cannot be destroyed by the government. So it was wonderful that it was saved, and as you know, monuments are being taken down all over the country, not just to Confederates, but just to founding fathers. American history is trying to be eradicated and erased by the powers that be. So, you know, we got to do what we got to do to preserve history. But this graphic novel, I created this in 2008. Before I get started, some books you should definitely look into. This is one of the best books on the Civil War I've ever read. It's called The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Civil War. It's outstanding. It also basically contradicts some of the general, what's considered general understandings of the war, the causes, the people who fought it. It's excellent, very eye-opening book. These are some books that went into my research for Claiborne. This one's called Black Southerners in Gray. Another one that's really good, Black Southerners in Confederate Armies. This one, Forgotten Confederates, an anthology about Black Southerners. And lastly, the most famous Black Confederate of all time, and actually one of the best sharpshooters of the war, snipers, Holt Collier. Fascinating life story. You should definitely check this guy out. I've been thinking about doing a graphic novel about him next. He's also the origin of the teddy bear. It's where the teddy bear came from with Teddy Roosevelt. Holt Collier is partly responsible for that. So he's a fascinating man and definitely should look into his life. Now, these people have largely been forgotten by history because they don't really fit the narrative. It makes people uncomfortable to talk about the contributions of Black Southerners during the war for the Confederacy. Now, you know, some were voluntary, some were slaves, obviously, so, you know, not everyone chose to serve in any capacity, but many did. So, getting to the graphic novel. So this is my graphic novel, Claiborne. And you'll see the foreword is by noted historian Thomas Cartwright. If you've ever seen the show Civil War journal on A&E that aired back in the 90s and early 2000s. Thomas Cartwright was a regular on that show. My introduction about the book and why I wrote it, and this quote from Patrick Claiborne, very revealing quote. Claiborne said, "It is said that slavery is all we are fighting for. Even if this were true, which we deny, it is not all our enemies are fighting for. It is merely the pretense to establish a more centralized form of government and to deprive us of our rights and liberties." Major General Patrick R. Claiborne. So that was Claiborne's view on the war. Central government, central power versus state power, which is what you heard the veteran at the beginning of the the video state. Now what I do is I open the novel with this scene of Claiborne on the battlefield. It's funny, I look back 10 years later and how much I've progressed as an artist. It's funny, artists always look at their older work and think, oh gosh, I've gotten a lot better since then. But storytelling in this book is still pretty strong. That was always one of my strengths, was visual storytelling and sequentials. So Claiborne, he sees the dead men everywhere, and there's no one in sight. Here comes the federal troops. By the way, they were called Federals during the war. They were not called Union soldiers. That is something that was penned later on. I think it sounds a little more less antagonistic to say Union soldiers versus Federal, but during the war they were called Federals, and these were Confederates. They were not called Union soldiers. So if you hear people say Union soldiers in a Civil War movie, that's actually inaccurate. Now he looks over the horizon, he sees these battle flags coming over the horizon, and sure enough, he sees an entire regiment or multiple regiments of black Confederate troops charging over the hill, and they push back the Federals, and he charges in and gets hit with an explosion, and of course, wakes up and it was a dream. Now, I know a lot of writers will say, oh, don't open with a dream, that's so cliched, and yeah, I mean, it can be, but it can also be effective. I could have opened this with him imagining it, I guess, but I wanted to hit the reader immediately with a very sort of stunning image. I mean, this is not an image that people would think to see. Wait, black soldiers with the rebel flag? What's going on here? Oh, okay, it was a dream. So he gets up and goes outside, and here's having some interaction here with another real-life historical figure. This is a general by the name of Lucius Polk. He tells Polk about the dream. This book was colored by Jay Brown, by the way, excellent colorist. He's currently my colorist on War Party. So he tells him about the plan. He looks out and sees the campfires at night. This was the battle flag, actually, of Claiborne's regiment. It was a white moon on a blue field. His regiment did not carry the Confederate battle flag. They carried this white flag. And whenever the Federals saw this flag in the fight, they knew it was Patrick Claiborne's division. And it was the hard-fightingest division in the Army of Tennessee. He was called the Stonewall Jackson of the West. Lee called him a meteor shining brightly in a clouded sky. The Western Army of Tennessee did not achieve too many victories, but if it's one thing they could tout success, it was Patrick Claiborne and his division. He sees this young boy sleeping in the cold, and he takes off his coat and puts it on the boy. Now, this is fabrication, and this is not based on actual event, but what I was showing here was Patrick Claiborne was very involved in the lives of his men. He was a general who he would always look out for the welfare of his soldiers. So I was using this as an example to show this. You see the boy sleeping. We come to daylight, and whammo, the same kid falls down with a bullet to the head, dead, and we are in the midst of battle. Now this is Missionary Ridge, the Battle of Missionary Ridge. He moves, this is another general named Granberry from Texas. He moves Granberry over to another position, opens fire. The Federals, this was Grant's troops, they were charging up the hill. Missionary Ridge was a defensive position that seemed impregnable, I can't say the word, totally defensible, let me use that word. In other words, hard to take. Impregnable? Is that what you say? So they were running low on ammunition, and they resorted to throwing rocks. Now here's another sort of embellishment They didn't necessarily hurl boulders down. They threw rocks at the Federals. I, created this dramatic image to just get the point across. And sometimes you'll get, historians, oh, you're changing history. That didn't actually happen. They didn't roll boulders. And, well, first of all, you weren't there, okay? So quit pretending like you were there. And number two, this happens in historical films all the time. I mean, Braveheart's full of inaccuracies. Glory is full of inaccuracies. Schindler's List. The goal of dramatic storytelling when you're dealing with historical figures is to embellish the drama while still maintaining the heart of the person you're talking about. Or, you try to get the main important facts correct, and then little details like this you'll embellish. And, you can say that's right or wrong, but that's the choice I made. So it drew the Federals back. They opened fire. Also, there's speculation there was a train tunnel. Some people say the Confederates charged out of the tunnel. Some say they didn't. I opted to go for it because once again, more dramatic. They're also hurling grenades down, which are basically just fuse-lit cannonballs. So anyways, Claiborne saved the army Claiborne saved the army at Missionary Ridge. If it had not been for his defensive action, the entire army of Tennessee they were in bad shape. The rest of the line, they were falling back, and the whole army probably would have been destroyed. Now this really happened. They had to cross the river, Chickamauga River, at night in the freezing cold. He told his men to take their uniforms off so they wouldn't get wet. So they crossed in their long johns, holding their rifles over the water, because black powder, if it gets wet, it ruins the powder. So, and can ruin your rifle. So they did cross the stream in the middle of the night. Now this is an action where Claiborne actually won the thanks of Congress, the Confederate Congress, called Ringgold Gap, Georgia. The army was in full retreat, the Army of Tennessee, and Hooker's troops were in hot pursuit, and their supply trains were in danger of being captured. So Ringgold Gap, which is a train station in North Georgia, Claiborne positioned his men. He only had 2 cannons. He had 2 cannons, and that is Govan, another one of his generals. And Claiborne is waiting for Hooker to come as close as he can. And he had the cannons hidden by bushes and trees. And as soon as they got within firing range, he told the men to remove the bushes. And he opened fire with both the cannons, with canister, and then told his men to rise. And they unleashed volley upon volley on Hooker's troops. And eventually Hooker had to fall back. So it was a massive lopsided defeat. Claiborne's much lesser force took out a massive force, federal force. And it gave the Army of Tennessee time to retreat into Georgia. So everyone bed down for the winter. Usually in the winter in the Civil War, armies, not always, but armies would go into winter camp, and the campaigns might slow down. The battles may be a little less. I know there's exceptions, things like Fredericksburg in Virginia. But they were at a place called Dalton, Georgia. This house is still there. This house is where General Johnston and Bragg, well, Bragg originally, and then he was replaced by Johnston. That's General Bragg right there. One of the worst commanders of the Civil War, by the way. Good friends with Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy. And that's a big reason why Davis kept him on as long as he did, in spite of all of his military failures. So Claiborne, basically, they're being threatened that they're going to have to change their flag to the battle flag, the traditional the Confederate battle flag. And they his division wanted to keep their flag because this had been through many battles. This was their flag. And of course, they wanted to standardize everything in the Confederate armies and have all the same battle flags. So he had to go in there and petition Bragg to not take their flags away. This really happened. He really did this. And I actually went to this house in Dalton, Georgia, took pictures of all the rooms inside and used the pictures. So this is, you want to talk about accuracy. I made sure to make that part accurate. So also I have Bragg being replaced by Johnson at the same time. That actually didn't happen that way. But Bragg was replaced by Joe Johnston briefly after the failure at Missionary Ridge, but I combined these into one scene. Once again, taking dramatic license for the sake of moving the story along. Claiborne comes out and he announces that they're going to get to keep their flag and all the troops cheer. Now here is a fictional event. Traveling with the Confederate Army, there were a lot of Teamsters. They were called Teamsters. They were basically free and slave black troops, if you want to call them troops. I mean, they weren't officially Confederate soldiers, but they drove wagons, they hauled supplies, they were cooks, things like that. But they also armed. Many of them were armed because they had to guard the wagons, they had to guard the supplies. Sometimes they would engage with Federal troops in combat. So this notion that they weren't armed is not true. You put a man in charge of a wagon of supplies, he better have a gun on him, or a shotgun or a pistol or something. And there are actual accounts in these books of black Teamsters engaging in combat with Federal troops. So you can call them soldiers or not, but they were fighting. So he encounters this one character who is a fictional character, by the way, that I created named Ned. Now, I did not know about Holt Collier, really that much about him when I wrote this book. Otherwise, I would have incorporated Holt into the story, and I may do that in the future. But I did base Ned and a lot of the things Ned does in this book off of accounts from these books, accounts of different black Confederates and engaging in combat, or in different theaters, some in the Eastern Theater, some in the Western. So Claiborne encounters him and just asks him, like why he's there. He's trying to get into the mind, like, why are you here? Why are you serving? You're a free man. You can do whatever you want. You can go anywhere you want. Why are you with the Army? And he basically just tells him it's the same reasons you're here. I'm fighting for my native land. It's very presumptuous to assume that only white Southerners would have regional pride. Black Southerners, if they were Georgian or Virginian or from Florida or Texas, they would have the same regional pride, and many did. So this notion that only white Southerners would fight in defense of their territory is very, very narrow-minded. That was not really the case. So then later on, we have a meeting with, now Claiborne became very good friends with his commander, General Hardee. That was the Corps commander, and Claiborne was one of his division commanders. And Hardee wanted to make Claiborne his best man at his wedding. So that's this scene where he's telling Claiborne about that. Now this event actually happened. We're back at the house in Dalton, Georgia. Claiborne realizes, and he's been thinking about this for several years up until this point, that they don't have enough men in the Confederate armies to win the war. Many of the battles the South lost were not because of lack of ammunition or firepower or guns or any of those things. It's a myth that the North won because of industry. I mean, the South had plenty of guns coming in through the blockade from Europe and ammunition. If anything, they were low on food. They didn't eat very well, the soldiers. But they had plenty of guns, plenty of ammunition. The reason the South couldn't win the war is because they didn't have enough men. They did not have enough soldiers. And Claiborne realized this, that the manpower shortage was really a problem. And he, which is why I showed this scene prior with the Teamsters, he got the idea of basically, what if we enlist black soldiers, former slaves, and offer them freedom in exchange. And not only freedom for them, but freedom for their families. So they would, in essence, be fighting for their own freedom. They would help us win our independence. We know this war is not just about economics and slavery. It's also about the states' rights to decide their own destiny, and the overbearing federal government that we're trying to shake free of. So why don't we just enlist troops and have them fight? Now, this was not a super revolutionary idea. Black troops fought in Washington's army during the Revolution, and black troops also fought under Andrew Jackson in New Orleans. So this was not like, oh gosh, you can't have black soldiers. The problem was, because of the hierarchy state of slavery in the South, you can't tell a man he is of less value or not equal to you and then also make him a soldier. That's a contradiction, because being a soldier was kind of the highest, most regarded thing during this time of chivalry and bravery and honor and such and so forth. So these generals all listened intently, and I researched all of the reactions of these people at this meeting, who was pro, who was against it. And one of the ones who was most vehemently against it was General H.T. Walker and General Bate were two that were vehemently opposed, and they expressed their opposition. Now, I embellished the dialogue, but it's still based on things they actually said. Hardy kind of took a neutral stance. He was not necessarily pro or against, even though I think he was there to support Claiborne. But people like Heinemann, who Claiborne actually saved his life back when they were in Arkansas practicing law. He was practicing law. Heinemann was in support of what Claiborne wanted to do. But a lot of these other generals had a big problem with it because, you know, I mean, we're not going to deny the mentality of the time period. I mean, this was pushing some buttons, no doubt about it. And I think Patrick Claiborne was actually a little surprised at the hostility he got from some of these men, because his viewpoint was, don't we want to win the war? I mean, what you're arguing about this, but we're going to lose this war if we don't get more men. So that was sort of his approach. So he made the appeal. Actually, this whole speech right here, I know it's a lot of dialogue, but this is verbatim what he said. I did not embellish this at all. A lot of the things Claiborne says in this meeting are taken right from his proposal because he wrote it out. He wrote a script for it before he did it. So now we're in Demopolis, Alabama, Bleak House Plantation. It no longer exists. I did not have adequate or accurate photos as far as I know, but I did find out that it was Gothically inspired, what they call New Gothic. So I took some liberties and came up with a New Gothic style based on other structures. It was kind of cold. It was actually raining and wet, and it probably would have happened indoors, but I wanted to have an outdoor. So this is me, you know, embellishing, you know, taking license. I wanted to have a nice outdoor sort of chilly winter wedding, but outdoors. Truthfully, it would have probably been inside, and it was kind of, the weather was actually kind of miserable. Hardy's there getting married, and this is true. This is where Claiborne noticed Susan Tarleton, apparently a very beautiful single woman at the time from Alabama. She lived in Mobile. And of course, you know, trying to do a little comic relief where he's looking at her. Now, Patrick Claiborne was very awkward with women. He was not a good dancer or anything like that. I think he was a very shy man. Immigrant from Ireland, if I failed to mention that. So he was an immigrant. He was not born in America. He had a heavy Irish accent. And his life story pre-war is actually very interesting. Had a lot of things happen. So he gives the ring, and then we go into the ceremony after. And of course, this is all, you know, dramatic embellishment. I've got, you know, he mentions, they're talking about, you know, Susan and things like that, and they're getting ready to dance, and he goes to ask her to dance, and another man gets there first. And then they reach for a glass, and he ends up meeting Susan's younger sister, which she actually really did exist, and this was really her boyfriend. Well, he's based on a real character as well, a younger guy. And they've all heard about Patrick Claiborne and his exploits in the military. And then they, of course, have to dance, and they do a Virginia reel. Claiborne and Susan are exchanging looks. And I have Susan's sister, which this is also kind of true. She's sort of, she was a big supporter of this, these two getting together. So she's trying to encourage him to go talk to her sister. And you have a little romantic exchange, you know. Some Gone with the Wind moments, whatever you want to call it. You know, some people, I've had some critics go, oh, you know, you're getting corny, you're getting, but you got to understand the way, the time period that this is. There were certain ways of interaction that men and women were expected in higher society, and it may be corny or cheesy to us today, but the whole love at first sight and people marrying for practical reasons, or it was different than today. It was a lot more opportunity and status, and there were just a lot of times people would fall in love later, you know, after they got married, or maybe they did fall in love at first sight. I don't know. It just depends on the person. But so that was explored. Then this is also true. He did spend some time in Mobile. This is his off time, basically his furlough. And I have some scenes where, you know, the sister and the boyfriend are kind of having some exchanges. And then he meets Susan's brother. Now, and he's also based on a real character. Now, I don't know what her brother thought about the whole slaves to soldiers things in the Confederate Army, but I do use an opportunity to bring that up. And I chose the angle that he kind of gets his foot in his mouth and sort of disses the idea, you know, and irritates Susan. I don't know if that happened. Obviously, that's, once again, historical embellishment, or fictional embellishment. So we get through all that. Claiborne excuses himself because he's kind of getting a little irritated. Of course, you got the Irish setter there. Ha, he's Irish, got the Irish setter. I know, it's silly, but, you know, you got to have some fun sometimes. This is a war book. There's a lot of death and violence. It's okay to put a little brevity and humor in there. He goes and he meets this little drummer boy. Now, this drummer boy did not exist. I made him a little cousin of Susan Tarleton, but he is based on a real drummer boy from Missouri who ends up getting, well, meeting his end, shall we say, at the Battle of Franklin, which will be at the end of this book. So I wanted to introduce him. Like I said, he didn't really exist as far as being a cousin of Susan Tarleton, but I threw him in there. So he wants to be a drummer, and Susan comes and apologizes for her brother's behavior, and it was just a great opportunity to show how she feels and she cares about him. Now, this also really happened. They attended a parade. Hardy and Claiborne and some of their troops attended a parade in downtown Mobile, and this is downtown Mobile, Alabama. And you have them in the parade, and Susan's looking at Claiborne, and you know, these are just opportunities to make character connections. They spent nights out on the town, and the boy's sleeping in the back, and she notices a battle scar on his face. Of course, once again, I'm not sure if this ever happened because he would hide it with his facial. That's why he grew a beard, by the way. He took a bullet through the jaw earlier in the war, and you know, I have her notice it, which is a premonition of things to come because it's a reminder of how dangerous it is what he does. You know, he is involved in a war after all. This is also true that the local paper, the Register, had mentioned that Patrick Claiborne was in town. So, you know, he realizes, oh, it's him. And then people start gathering around when they hear the word, and he's kind of mobbed like a celebrity. That did happen, by the way. Claiborne was very well known in his time. I mean, he was kind of like I said, he was the Stonewall Jackson of the West. He was becoming a little bit of a celebrity because he was just such a great military commander, and word got around at how many times he had saved the Army of Tennessee with his division. He hears piano playing. He goes inside, and it's Susan. Now, did Susan play piano? Most likely. A lot of upper society women at the time would have, and I think she did actually. I think I did research that and found out she did play piano. I can't remember. It's been a while. So I use that as an opportunity for, he knew she played piano, so he gives her a piece of sheet music, and it's an old Irish tune, and he wants her to learn it and play it for him the next time he comes back. Embellishment, don't know if that ever happened, but once again, this is a graphic novel. So, and then he proposes to her, and the first time, this is true, first time he proposed to her, she turned him down. She was worried, I think, about him dying in the war. Then we go back to Confederate camp in Dalton, Georgia. This scene, 100% fictional. All right, just going to say that right now. Were there black snipers in the Confederate Army that were great shots? Yes, I just mentioned one myself, Holt Collier. The Battle of Seven Pines and the 7 Days, some Federal troops actually captured a black sniper in a tree who was taking out all sorts of soldiers. And they couldn't believe what a good shot he was, and they, you know, took him prisoner, and they asked him why he was fighting, and he said, because I'm a Virginian and you're down here. So they did exist. So I use this as an opportunity to take Ned and show that he's an excellent shot. And so General Polk is here, you know, sort of overseeing the events. Now, would a general actually be involved in this? Probably not. I mean, it's a little far-fetched. But he puts their best sniper against Ned, and he scores them. And it's just an opportunity to show that Ned actually won. He's actually the better shot. It's reiterating the fact that, you know, black soldiers or black troops are a viable alternative. And of course, some of the guys get upset about it. I don't shy away from showing racism in this book at all, because I mean, it by all means absolutely did exist. But it's a lot more nuanced than we like to present it, looking back on history with our 21st century eyes. You really have to put yourself in the context of the time period. It was a different world. Okay, he even offers to shake the man's hand, and the man refuses. See, so then Walker comes in. This is a great opportunity for Walker, and I'm sorry to fans of Walker. If you're part of a chapter of the Sons of Confederate Veterans and you're the Walker chapter, I know I was not very kind to the man. I don't question his bravery in combat, but him being the antagonist, the main antagonist against Patrick Claiborne, he had to be the villain in the story. I had to have a villain, and he's the villain. He is the antagonist to what Claiborne's trying to achieve, and he did, by the way, try to thwart efforts, and reported Claiborne to President Jefferson Davis for what he was trying to do. He thought it tantamount to treason. He accused Claiborne of being a traitor for proposing this idea. So, villain in my book. He orders them to stop. Then he comes to Johnston and complains about it, and then he threatens. He says he demands a copy of the proposal from Claiborne, which this did happen. He did demand a copy of the proposal, and he said, I'm sending it to Richmond. And Claiborne said, good, I want you to send it to Richmond. I want the president to hear about this because I want this to happen. He thinks, though, Claiborne is going to be in big trouble for doing this. Then I have a scene where Claiborne says he's been ordered to disarm Ned, and that he's been relegated back to a teamster. He cannot be fighting. He cannot be shooting guns. He cannot be carrying ammunition. And he doesn't agree with it, but he takes it away. I feel like this book was saved by my colorist. I mean, the art's decent, but like I said, I'm a better artist now. But man, James Brown just killed it on the colors, the lighting and everything. So this did happen. Claiborne did take a train to Alabama again to go visit Susan. Now, this is fictional, but it's probable that something like this could have gone down. And what I mean is, I have this strange man watching Claiborne on the train, and Claiborne sees that he's armed. He goes to visit Susan. The man's watching him. The reason why I added this in here is because when Bragg, who is now Davis's advisor, when President Davis got wind of the proposal because Walker sent it to him, and Bragg heard about it, he told Davis that anyone who supported this should bear watching. They need to be watched, including Patrick Claiborne. So it is logical to me that if you say someone's bears watching, then you would send someone to watch them, a spy or someone from the government. So this is a Confederate tantamount to an FBI agent spying on his activities. Claiborne, spends the night out with Susan again, which this is the real fountain in downtown Mobile, by the way. And then I have a scene, once again, completely fictional. If you're a fan of H.T. Walker, don't hate me. But Walker confronts Ned and basically threatens him with death. I mean, Walker was he was a tough dude. Is this a disservice to someone historically to throw this in here when you don't know for sure it happened? I have mixed emotions about it looking back. It's probably not fair to do this. You write things and then later on you look back and you're like, well, maybe I went too far. So this might be going too far. I get it. But, once again, I had to have a villain, I had to have an antagonist, and I needed to show that he was indeed a threat to everything Claiborne was trying to accomplish here. And there's no better way than show him to be a direct threat to Ned. And, you could also see this as a metaphor for how he feels about all of this. So now we're back in Mobile, and Drummer Boy wants to go off, and Claiborne tells him no, tells Susan goodnight. A lot of courting going on in this book. He sees the man following him. He hunts him down, chases him, confronts him, and realizes the guy is from the government. He knows what's going on. Now we're in Richmond, Virginia. This is the actual Confederate White House. It is still in Richmond. It's called the Museum of the Confederacy now, but it was originally the White House. I did my research and tried to get that as accurate as possible. Here's the proposal, and you have Bragg, Davis, and Judah Benjamin. He was the Secretary of War, I believe, at one point, and then Secretary of State at another. Forgive my my memory at this point. I can't remember which one he was at this point. But Judah Benjamin was Jewish. He was the only Jewish man in the Confederate government at the time, as far as I know. So Davis is basically defending Claiborne at first, saying, you know, this guy's one of the best we've got and all this. And Bragg's, of course, being all political about the issue. This is actually how Davis's office looked. He had a gas line going to a lamp and everything. Even the wallpaper's accurate. The rugs, everything's accurate. Furniture, everything. So basically, this is where Judah Benjamin's defending Claiborne's proposal. He was actually in support of it. Davis was kind of on the fence, and of course Bragg was against it, and Davis eventually yields to Bragg's demands to have them watched. Now it's raining. Claiborne's about to leave. He's about to say goodbye to Susan. They have a moment, and she finally accepts his proposal for marriage, which is true. She finally did accept his proposal, reluctantly. Not because she didn't like him, but because she was just so afraid that something was going to happen to him. I think she wanted to wait till the war was over, see if he survived. He boards the steamer, and I have the drummer boy sneaking aboard. Once again, fictional character, never happened. Now we're at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, Georgia. This was a massive victory for Johnston's army. I mean, it just decimated the attacking troops, Sherman's troops. And this is a position where Polk is. Now, I actually have Ned hauling ammunition in this battle. He's handing out ammunition, which that would have happened. Teamsters would have been doing that. The troops are charging and attacking. One of the men goes down, and of course, Polk orders, or he's like, hand me the musket, and Polk gets hit. Now, this is inaccurate. Polk actually got wounded on the mud line. He did not get wounded at Kennesaw Mountain. This was one research error that I didn't realize till after I wrote the book. But I don't necessarily regret it because it added to the drama of the scene, and it is what it is. So I have him. The wound is correct, just the location of the battle isn't. Now I do have Claiborne use an opportunity. He knows Ned can fight. He knows Ned can shoot, and he takes an opportunity to hand Ned the rifle of one of the downed soldiers and say, "Join in the ranks." So Ned is now unofficially fighting as a Confederate soldier. Okay. Once again, didn't happen in this way, but this did happen many times in battle. I've read accounts where slaves or former slaves or teamsters would just pick up guns and start fighting, sometimes alongside their masters, or other times, if they were freed, black teamsters, to defend a wagon, or it happened. Okay, they just weren't considered officially soldiers at the time. So they open fire, and wipe out the Federal attack. Claiborne was often on the front lines with his men, even though he was a general. There's a case in Chickamauga where he loaded up his cap with ammunition and was walking around handing out ammunition to his men. That's how involved this guy was. I mean, he started the war at a very low, I believe as a colonel of a regiment, worked his way all the way up to Major General. Got our fictional drummer boy here. He hears a shot ring out. Ned's mule is dead. Shot dead. Don't know who did it. He calls Claiborne. Claiborne comes out to see, and he knows, he has an idea who did it. Once again, is this unfair to H.T. Walker? I mean, he never shot a mule, maybe. But just trying to show more antagonism towards what Claiborne's trying to accomplish here. Now we're in LaGrange, Georgia. This actually did happen. Susan and Hardy's wife were there to meet up with Hardy and Claiborne, and she has the song ready to play for him that he gave her. But unfortunately, they get the news that they're not going to be able to make it. They could not get away. The fighting's too intense right now. So that really did happen. Now we're in the Confederate White House, and they're talking about possibly replacing Joe Johnston with another commander. And then here we have completely fictional scene. Claiborne realizes that Ned had a wife, but she was sold to a different location, different plantation. And he did some research to find out where his wife was. So Granbury's waiting for him. Got a little humorous scene with a horse. And he realizes that it is the correct place after talking to the owners. And you see a woman run out who is most likely Ned's wife. Did this happen? No. Is it realistic that a general would take time off to go do something like this? Probably not. I mean, let's be honest. So a little far-fetched, I get it. But once again, just part of the storytelling. You look back at these things and you realize, okay, maybe I could have wrote that differently, or maybe that was a little much. Now we're in Atlanta, Georgia, and we have the new commander, John Bell Hood. Now let me get something straight about John Bell Hood. At this point in the war, as far as the Army of Tennessee is concerned, and Patrick Claiborne, Hood is an adversary. He's a shadow of his former self. And everything, all the decisions Hood makes from here out cause problems for everybody. So if you just judge Hood by what I present in this book, you would think he was this terrible guy. John Bell Hood was actually an incredibly brave commander and soldier. And when he was a brigade commander with Lee's army, he was one of the most reliable and vicious fighting brigades in the entire army. Hood was incredibly brave. Wasn't the smartest guy, graduated the bottom of his class, I believe, at West Point, but not really a bad man, okay? Now, I am a little hard on him in this graphic novel, probably a little harder than I should have been, but I want to get that straight and clear right now, that I am not questioning the man's bravery or his commitment. And after the war, he actually he said he agreed with Claiborne about enlisting and arming freed slaves to be soldiers in the Confederacy. He agreed with it. And he said, and he even went as far as to say, I think it would have won the war for us. So props to Hood for acknowledging that later. But I mean, he's a damaged man. He lost a leg at Chickamauga. His arm had been irreparably wounded from Gettysburg. I mean, this guy took a lot of abuse from the war. There's speculation he was taking laudanum for his pain. That's a very controversial topic. Some people disagree with it, but it doesn't seem to me to be unrealistic that he probably was, or at the very least, drinking a lot of alcohol. I don't know if he drank or not, but he would have to do something. This would not be pleasant. You're strapped to a horse with one leg. The guy was in bad shape. He should not have been in command of an army. He should have been retired and in bed. But he had a fighting reputation, and all Johnston was doing was retreating for the most part to keep his army intact, and Davis wanted the Army of Tennessee to punch back, and he knew if Hood was commander, he would punch back. So I have Walker tell Hood about Claiborne's proposal. You know, he's being a little tattletale. And Hood basically is just like, you know, don't bother me with this stuff right now. You know, he's kind of indifferent to it. So I don't make Hood against it. He's just like, why are you bothering me with this right now? We have more important things to worry about. So here we are at the Battle of Atlanta, at least one of the battles. And Walker makes a threat to Claiborne, you know, when this war is over, or you know, I'm going to make sure that you don't get away with this. And of course, this really happened. Walker was killed most likely by a sniper on Bald Hill during the Battle of Atlanta, so he dies immediately. So now he's out of the picture. Once again, brave commander, led from the front, not taking anything away from that. Then I have a montage, Claiborne sending a letter to Susan talking about Atlanta and how they lost the battle and the city's burned to the ground, everyone's gone, and everything's collapsing basically. Now we're in Palmetto, Georgia, where they're camped. Davis actually visited Hood in the Army at this time. That is true. And the Army would shout Johnston sometimes when Hood would ride by and to hurt his feelings. That was true. They did not like Hood being commander. They loved Joe Johnston. Hardee, this is true as well. Hardee had had enough of John Bell Hood by this point. And he basically said he requested a transfer of command to South Carolina. Claiborne would not go with him because he did not want to leave his men. He was not going to leave his men behind. Hardee tried to get him to go. He wouldn't go. So there was a lot of dissatisfaction to Hood as commander. And that's really why he comes across in this graphic novel as being so insufferable when, he did a lot of great things earlier in the war as a military leader. He just was promoted above his ability. He never should have been promoted probably beyond division commander. I don't even think he should have been a corps commander. He was best as a brigadier general and a division commander. Basically, Hardee just tells Claiborne, just give it up on this, slave to soldier stuff, this Black Confederate idea. It's not going to work. The war, we got to focus on trying to win this war ourselves, and it is what it is. This is something I added. I don't believe this was based on fact, but I did have Susan send Claiborne basically a stitched handkerchief with his initials on it. He's there dreaming about his woman. He tries to get Hood to give him a furlough to see her. Hood refuses. He wouldn't let him go. See, once again, he's, as far as Claiborne's concerned, Hood's an antagonist. As far as the Army of Tennessee is concerned, Hood is an antagonist. So that's why he comes across this way in this graphic novel. Because at this point, he was, as far as they're concerned. And it's from their point of view. So he's been denied leave. Susan gets really angry and upset because this is the second time she's tried to see him and she can't see him. You keep in mind, they're still not married at this point. They're only engaged. Now, Granberry basically says that the men are talking about going home. There's desertion in the ranks. Everyone's just, the army's demoralized. And he's basically saying, the men need to hear from you. You're the only reason why they're still here. We have to understand about, especially this point in the war, the soldiers weren't fighting for the Confederacy anymore. They weren't fighting even necessarily for any ideology anymore. They were fighting for each other, and they were fighting for their commanders. When Lee surrendered, the men he had left in the Army of Northern Virginia, they were there for Lee. That's why they were there. They loved him, the man, and they would do anything for him, because where he had taken them. Same thing goes for in a situation like this. These men stayed for Patrick Claiborne. They didn't stay for the Army of Tennessee. They were getting their, at this point, they were getting their butts whooped. It looked like the end was near, but they weren't going to leave. They weren't going to abandon each other. And this is the thing that you have to understand about soldiers and why all soldiers in all wars deserve respect for their bravery, regardless of the political goals they're fighting for or their governments, let me say, may be fighting for. The soldiers don't fight for politics, mostly. Soldiers fight for each other. And, you invade someone's territory, politics go out the window. They're going to defend their territory. They're going to defend their neighbors, their homes, the place they live. Even if they disagree, there were quite a few anti-slavery Confederates, generals even, who thought slavery needed to go. But they still fought for their homes. So that is deserving of respect, regardless of what... progressive minds might say today. So Claiborne's asleep. You see some people sneaking around the tent. He pulls the flap away. And this actually really happened. Powder Springs in Georgia. His troops serenaded him. They played a song. They stood out there and waited for him. I also use this, and he gave a speech, a lot of which I took from an actual speech. Now, this was interesting. I threw them in here, and you may not be able to tell. There was a Mexican Confederate in his division, and there was a Chinese Confederate in his division. So I always found that very interesting. So I was like, yeah, I'll show the Mexican and Chinese guy standing there. Would they have been standing next to each other in ranks? No. But the point is, I thought it would be cool to show, because that is true. That is factual. We have a more diverse division than your Yankee regiments. We got a Hispanic, we got an Asian, and we have black Teamsters, right? So kind of ironic, right? So Claiborne comes out. He's got his flag, life and death, I'm with you, and we got the lightning, and now they're marching into Tennessee. So what happened is, after Sherman took Atlanta and started marching to the sea, rather than chase him and continually harass his army, Hood went the other direction. Hood said, I'm going to go back into Tennessee. I'm going to go north. I'm going to go the opposite way and take on Schofield's army in Tennessee. He took an aggressive action rather than a defensive action, which unfortunately left Sherman pretty much completely unopposed in Georgia, and he wreaked havoc. And he went all the way to Savannah, and then he marched into South Carolina, and they burned Columbia to the ground. So they were fighting very small units, local units, but there was no real army to take them on. So they had to march into, this is true, many Confederates did not have adequate footwear at this point in the war and were barefoot, marching through the mud. This actually happened. They saw the rain had unearthed bodies from previous battles years before. Many times soldiers were buried in mass graves, very shallow graves, because there wasn't time to get the bodies out of there, and the army would be on the move again. And so a year later, you'd come back, and there'd be skeletons there from the battle the year before. There'd be whitewashed bones with bullet holes. It's pretty creepy. This did happen one time on occasion. Hood did fall off his horse in front of his men. It was very embarrassing for him. He did say, make sure they're not laughing at me, and it was just a pathetic sight. It was, like I said, the man should have been retired. He had done his duty, paid more than enough of a physical cost for the war. He did not need to be commanding an army right now. This really happened. They took a federal fort. This is back in Dalton, Georgia, where that house was earlier, where he gave the proposal pitch. Back in Dalton, Georgia, this fort surrendered. And among many of the prisoners, there were some, at this point in the war, the North had enlisted quite a few black troops, or as they call them, colored troops, United States colored troops. Of course, we all know about the 54th Massachusetts from the movie Glory. Great film, by the way. Several inaccuracies, just like this, but still a great film. And so this did happen. The black troops were basically being robbed. Some of the soldiers took their belongings, and there were even some issues where men were being threatened. I embellished this a little bit with the bigger, stronger one telling the weaker, smaller one to stand up, and they threaten him. There's no evidence. No, this is me taking license as well. Claiborne, I think, was aware this was going on. He didn't intervene in this way, but I did read that he removed the black prisoners out of their custody and then put them to work to dismantling the railroads out there. So he did separate them from the harassment. And, I think Claiborne seems to be a very fair and compassionate man, so I don't think a guy who was trying to win the hearts and minds of black Southerners to get them to fight for the South, I don't think he would take a heavy-handed approach with prisoners, and he didn't. So it was interesting, and once again, I'm illustrating there is racism, guys. I'm not saying all Confederates were these nice, egalitarian, compassionate people. There are sociopaths everywhere, right? There were sociopaths fighting for the North. There were sociopaths fighting for the South. When you have war and you have soldiers, you have people of all types of personalities in the ranks, and you have some really disgusting human beings fighting for both sides, and they show their true colors. If you've ever seen the movie Gettysburg, probably my favorite Yankee of the whole war, Chamberlain, the commander of the 20th Maine, played by Jeff Daniels in the movie Gettysburg. Chamberlain made a statement about war that is probably one of the best I've ever heard. He said, "War is a test of character. It makes bad men worse and good men better. It shows who you really are." And some of that is the way you treat your enemies. Now, I take this opportunity, the federal prisoners have a discussion with Ned, who's a Teamster, and they're going back and forth about, why are you fighting for the North? Why are you fighting for the South? It was an interesting opportunity to show duality on both sides. I have a little discussion where Hood talks to Claiborne about, why'd you move or he's thanking him for putting them on the railroads. He didn't want the situation to get out of control. I mean, don't get me wrong. There were instances where black prisoners were executed. It did happen, and there were instances where Confederate prisoners were executed by white Northern soldiers as well. So it did happen, and I kind of hint that Hood kind of agrees with him, but he's just now's not the time. He's just putting it off. Then I have this map of Tennessee. I show them marching into where they're heading. This is true. Somebody had posted this sign, and he saw it. Susan wakes up from a nightmare. She did have premonitions. They ride a train at one point. This is true. Polk Church, Mount Pleasant, still there. I went there, took pictures. Claiborne saw this church, and when he saw the graveyard, and of course I see him imagining his own coffin, he basically said, death wouldn't be so bad if you could be buried somewhere as pretty as this. So that did happen. Of course, I bring Ned, my fictional character, into the scene, and they have a discussion about life and death and destiny. Claiborne, I don't want to say he was a fatalist, but I think he could kind of see the writing on the wall, and he knew with what they were about to do and where they were heading and with who was in command of this army, he was never at greater risk of being killed. Let's put it that way. Okay, Spring Hill, Tennessee. This is also true. This is where Nathan Bedford Forrest comes into the picture. Most brilliant cavalry commander of the war. Actually, many would say the most brilliant military mind of the war. He started the war as a private and ended as a lieutenant general, highest rank advancement of anybody in the entire Civil War. Of course, I know he's a figure of controversy today because of all of his post-war activities, but I definitely would encourage you to research that more. To get a little context. It's a lot more nuanced and not as cut and dry as you might think. So we have an interaction between them and Frank Cheatham, who was the Corps commander, the new Corps commander in place of, I believe, wasn't he? I think he replaced Hardy. He was Claiborne's new Corps commander. And he's saying, Hood's kind of insulting Claiborne's men, saying the Texans are lagging and all that. There was a little bit of animosity there, and I just don't think Hood was in his best spirits. He was having some problems. This is the Battle of Spring Hill, where they actually had some success. They took the breastworks. Forrest led a cavalry charge, and that battle went pretty well. And this was their opportunity to trap and potentially destroy Schofield's army. They had them on the run, they had the road, they had them sort of blocked, their way of retreat blocked, and this is where things went wrong. At night, I have a little interaction with Claiborne and Ned, and he was supposed to attack at night or block the road at night, and somewhere along the line some orders got confused. I don't blame Claiborne for this because that is not in his character to not be detail-oriented and follow instructions. So at some point, he did not get the proper orders that he needed to block this road. So they hadn't heard anything from command, so he sends the little boy, which he's fictional, but there is accounts of messengers running back and forth to Hood's headquarters saying, the Federals are getting away. The boy sees the Federals marching up the road. They're getting away. They're escaping. So he runs to tell Hood. Now, this is controversial. I have Hood chugging a bottle of medication. I don't say what it is, but of course the reader assumes it's laudanum. Some people say that Hood might have been drugged that night and his judgment was off. The kid tells Hood, you know, what are we going to do? And he just tells him to go away. He's coming back, and he thinks he reached Confederate camp, but he actually ran into Federals, and they're going to capture him. Now, this is true. There were so many, the camps were so close that some troops did stumble into each other's camps. I have Ned saving the little drummer boy from the Federals, or threatening the Federals. The guy refuses to surrender. He doesn't think he'll actually shoot him. He does. Once again, all fictional. He brings them two prisoners. The next morning, they find out the Union Army got away. And this is true. They had a breakfast at, I believe it was Ripa Villa plantation. And Hood just lays into everybody. And he did. He blamed everybody but himself. He did. He did not accept responsibility for this as commander. He blamed Frank Cheatham and just went off. And when they were leaving, this actually really happened. Now, Forrest didn't grab him. You know, that's for dramatic effect. But Forrest did say this, that if you ever interfere, or if you were a whole man, I'd whip you with an inch of your life. He did threaten Hood. Forrest didn't care. I mean, he threatened Bragg at one time. He threatened to kill Bragg one time, and Bragg did not take him up on charge or put him up on charges or anything, because he knew he'd do it. So Forrest could be very dangerous and volatile. So he did threaten Hood. Then Breezy Hill, this is Franklin, Tennessee. Claiborne was surveying the works, and he realized all their works are done. If we charge this, we're going to get massacred. This is a bad idea. I have a fictional interchange, sort of a last goodbye with him and Ned. He tells Ned that he found his wife, and you can go to her and after the war. And Ned thanks him for treating him like a man and with dignity. And once again, fictional scene, but representative, I feel, of what what he was trying to accomplish. It's sort of the symbolic relationship between this Confederate general and his concept for what he thought was going to save the South in the war. That's what this represents. So now at the Confederate lines, Claiborne's basically, he was despondent at this point. I think he knew it was over. He knew he was going to die. And Govan said, a lot of us aren't going to make it back to Arkansas. Have him sort of brushing his hand on the handkerchief that Susan gave him. And he did say this: if we are to die, let us die like men. Now, that's a line today people might roll their eyes. Oh, gosh, how corny. You got to understand the way people thought back then. Honor is not a concept that we have in our society anymore. Chivalry, honor, dignity, doing your duty, those things are lost concepts. At this time, you got to think it's almost like the Spartans. In 300, he tells the traitor, "May you live forever." And what he's saying, that's an insult, because what he's saying is, I hope no one remembers you. I hope you have no legacy. I hope you're not immortal. I hope you don't die in combat doing brave deeds. So that mentality still existed in the mid-1800s, especially in the United States. And that's what he said. Hey, we're all going to go. Death is coming for us all. So let's at least die like men. Let's at least be brave and die standing up against our foes and not die like cowards. So the drums roll. You got the Federals looking on like they can't believe what's about to happen. Are they really going to come? And there's Granbury with this. There's the Claiborne's flag with the Texas star in the middle. That's accurate. And they actually went in with the bands playing Bonnie Blue Flag and Dixie. And it was like this. It was one of the grandest charges of the Civil War, right next to Pickett's Charge. It is the Pickett's Charge of the West, Franklin. You got the Federals loading the cannons, Granbury looking on. And we have a massive panorama of Confederates coming out of the woods with the artillery opening fire. And this is where the gore sort of kicks in. These shells would just totally blow people's bodies apart, rip their heads off, faces off. It's really gory. And they're charging in. And there's a guy disemboweled there. They also had shells that were fused, and they would explode overhead and rain down shrapnel from above. So that's why you see shells blowing up in the sky. It's raining down metal on the men below, or lead.
Granberries, hold your ranks, boys. They're coming in, opening fire. A little decapitation there.
Federal troops are ready. Claiborne's charging. Color bearer falls. More firing, you know, and then there's a massive charge. And this is, Granberry actually said this because he didn't like what he heard, what Hood said about his Texans. He said, Texans, never let it be said you lag in a fight. Charge. They charge. The shells explode. You know, panorama. That's yours truly, by the way, my appearance in my own book. Now, what happened was the front rank retreated, and as they retreated and started to run into the other ranks, the Federals in the rear rank could not open fire because they would shoot their own men. But I have, you know, this panicked soldier, trigger happy, opens fire, and then the line opened up, and this did actually happen. A lot of Federals ended up shooting some of their own men. Of course, they hit a lot of Confederates as well. It's chaos. That was the volley that most likely killed Granberry. The bullet went right through his skull, and he did collapse on his knees and literally die on his knees. He fell for it, and he was found dead like that on the battlefield. The drummer boy goes up to him. Of course, like I said, this is based on a real drummer boy from Missouri at this point. And he ran up and saw the cannon. They want to turn the cannons on him. He ran up and he shoved a fence rail into the cannon so it couldn't be used, unaware that the cannon was already loaded, and it blew him to smithereens. The artilleryman actually said that the little drummer boy exploded like a ripe tomato. That's in his account. Now, this is one drawing inaccuracy. I have the fuse still attached to the lanyard. The fuse actually would still be in the barrel of cannon. I had a reenactor point this out to me. He's like, "You got the fuse out." This is Civil War buffs, by the way. "You've got the fuse still attached to the lanyard," you know. So I mean, inaccurate. I get it. You got the rolling drum blown to pieces. Claiborne says, "Charge," and this really happened. His first horse was killed by small arms fire, and they're fighting. You got more men getting blown apart and opening fire. This was a comic shop owner in Jacksonville. He had begged me to have him put in my book, so I did. This is a guy with his jaw shot off, by the way. That tend to happen. Those balls would just rip your jaw right off if they clipped your jaw. Total mess. I mean, bodies piling up. Bloody massacre. Now, this actually happened. Another officer offered to give Claiborne his horse, and as soon as Claiborne mounted that horse, it was disemboweled by an artillery shell. And this is where it gets very cinematic. If this were ever a movie, I would actually overlay it with this song, this Irish song that he gave Susan. So the sword falls. Susan goes to the piano. We flash to Claiborne, and she's on his mind. She puts the music, and she starts singing the song, and these are the words to the song. So he's looking back. He knows as the end is coming. She's playing the piano. He picks up his sword. Seeing his men fall all around him, he realizes he has to continue with the charge. She's playing. That is the cotton gin, no longer there on the Franklin property. We're opening fire. The reason why it's all dismantled is because they took a lot of the wood out of the cotton gin to make the breastworks. Picks up his kepi. Blatant ripoff of 300 right here. This is my ode to Frank Miller's 300. You know, like Leonidas. There's Govan. He charges, and it was right near the cotton gin where a bullet pierced Patrick Claiborne's heart, and he was pretty much killed instantly, as far as I know. And I show her reaching out to his picture. Now, she doesn't know he's dead, but, you know, I'm overlapping, you know, what could have been, intercutting. Drops the sword. Sun is fading. Now, this battle went on throughout the night. It went on and on and on and on. Several Confederate generals were killed in the charge. It was a bloody massacre. It was the greatest loss of commanders in just about any battle or any charge of the war. It was a totally pointless attack. Didn't need to happen. Forrest was against it. Claiborne was against it. Pretty much everybody was against it except John Bell Hood. So, and the Army of Tennessee never forgave Hood for it. They said Hood has destroyed this army, you know, and it was one of Hood's greatest mistakes as a commander. Now, this is the next morning. You see the cotton gin. Now, the Confederates did take possession of the field. Schofield retreated that night, and you're seeing Confederates' wagons gathering the wounded, and this massive dead. And this actually was true. There were so many bodies piled up that some men died standing up. their bodies were leaning up against other dead men. Just crazy. Once again, beautiful lighting by this page by Jay Brown. Just wow, outstanding. It doesn't get any better than that, guys. Wow. Okay, so here we are. This house is still there. It's Carnton Plantation in Tennessee, and the bodies of 4 of the generals were laid on the porch, including Patrick Claiborne. There's Granberry dead right next to him. And, of course, they lay the handkerchief on his face that Susan gave him. Now, this is true. Back in Mobile, 5 days later, Susan was in the garden, and that same newspaper boy walks by and just says, "Big battle near Franklin, Tennessee. Claiborne and other generals killed." That's how she found out. You know, no social media, no cell phones, no TV, no radio. A paper boy, and that's how she knew that her fiance was dead. Fictional. I do have Ned reunite with his wife. It's a nice little end to Ned's fictional story. Then Richmond, Virginia. The window is vibrating. The federal troops, this is in March, several months later. Federal troops are pretty much besieging Richmond. They're going to have to withdraw or get out of the capital and flee because Lee can't hold them at Petersburg any longer. Judah Benjamin comes up, slams Claiborne's proposal on the desk and looks at him like, "I love this moment. You should have listened, and you didn't." Then I show a montage of the Battle of Nashville. And this is where the Army of the Tennessee completely just gets pretty much destroyed, falls apart. Thomas attacks, and this is what's ironic. Many of the troops, some of which are Claiborne's troops, were actually attacked by U.S. colored troops. There's your irony. The whole army was routed at Nashville, and it was raining during that battle at one point. And I show Davis, and this really happened on March 13th. The Confederate Congress finally approved, because Robert E. Lee agreed and put his endorsement on it, General Lee. They approved black soldiers to be in the Confederate armies. And there actually was a black regiment raised in Richmond. But it was too little too late. The war was, Lee was literally going to be surrendering within another month, less than a month. And that showed Lee's surrender to Grant. Now, of course, the Army of Tennessee, which Claiborne was a part of, was still active out west. So the war didn't technically end right when Lee surrendered, but everybody knew it was the end because the Army of Tennessee would surrender 2 weeks later. And then it does say, I did say, and this is true, Susan Tarleton would be dead in less than 4 years. Now, I said it was believed she died of a broken heart. There's no evidence for that. But the point I'm making is I think it was so traumatizing to her. If you go through a trauma, you've heard of depression killing people. It can do it. Now, she did remarry. She did find someone, well, she never married Claiborne, but she did find someone to marry. But yeah, she was dead in less than 4 years. Never had any children, as far as I understand. And of course, she got the engagement ring and the letters and the song and Claiborne's portrait. And then this is actually the Claiborne's grave in Helena, Arkansas. They did bury Claiborne in that spot he wanted to be buried at first by Polk Church, but then they relocated his body to Helena, and that's where he is today, right there in the hill. So, and then December 1864, Naomi Hayes wrote, "Fare thee well, departed chieftain, Erin's land send forth a wail, and O my country, sad laments thee, pass so soon death's dark veil. Blow ye breezes softly o'er him, fan his brow with gentle breath, disturb ye not his gentle slumbers, Claiborne sleeps the sleep of death. Rest thee, Claiborne, tears of sadness flow from hearts thou'st nobly won, memory ne'er will cease to cherish deeds of glory thou hast done." And that is the Claiborne family crest you see there behind there. And this is a piece of art I did called Claiborne's Dream. You got the Black Confederate soldiers flag behind it. and some quotes in the back. One from Hardy, one from Lee, one from Hood. Excellent quotes, actually, and then quotes from Claiborne. I'm not going to read them all now, but they're very revealing. And then I've got some suggested reading that a lot of my research was based on in this book. So that is the deep dive into Claiborne, the graphic novel. It is available on Amazon if you're interested in ordering it. It's also available on my website at rampartpress.com. And if you want to check out my other works, check out our limited series War Party. It's a 6-issue miniseries, and you can find that on Indiegogo and on my website as well. Thanks for hanging out. I know it's a long one, but hope you enjoyed this deep dive. Bye.